Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Having bought a cake to go with her coffee after a hard day, the woman entered her apartment. But before she could even take off her shoes, she froze, staring at unfamiliar suitcases. And when she saw who came out of the bathroom, she nearly slid down the wall in shock. Hello, dear friends. Behind the closed doors of every home, its own dramas unfold. Today's story is about one of them. I'd be happy to know which corner of the world you're listening from. Right to me, and I'll begin. Estella climbed the stairs slowly, feeling every step echo with heaviness in her legs. It had been the kind of day that made her want to just sink into the ground and not come out until the next Monday. Her boss had chewed her out again over a report she was rewriting for the third time. Her colleague Clara had spent the whole day playing the victim of circumstances, and during her lunch break, Estella had managed to spill a cup of coffee on herself and had to spend the rest of the day with a stain on her blouse. The only bright thought was that at home Diego would be waiting for her, and they could enjoy coffee with something sweet. That was why, passing by the bakery, she couldn't resist buying a small Malhojas cake, the very one she and her husband adored but only bought for special occasions. And today, the special occasion was simply the desire to cheer herself up after a nightmare of a day. The keys jingled in the lock with their familiar metallic sound, and Estella pushed the door open, already savoring the thought of cozy domestic warmth. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, she froze, as if she had been hit by an electric shock. In the hallway, where normally only hers and Diego's shoes and jackets stood, there were now two huge suitcases and piles of bags, and the air was heavy with an unfamiliar perfume, thick, sweet, and cloying, making her head ache instantly. Estella stood still, unable to take another step, feeling the cake in her hands grow unbearably heavy. Her heart pounded so loudly it seemed to echo through the whole apartment. Her thoughts scattered wildly. Maybe the neighbors had made a mistake, or had Diego invited someone without telling her. But the suitcases looked as if their owners intended to stay for quite a while. "Estelita, my darling," came a voice she knew all too well, and from the bathroom like a genie from a bottle emerged Aunt Catalina. Estella felt her knees go weak. Catalina looked exactly the same as 3 years ago, the last time Estella had seen her, plump, with bright red hair arranged in an elaborate style, and makeup that seemed to have been applied with a trowel. She was wearing a fuchsia sequin dress that strained at the seams, and around her neck hung so many chains and beads that she looked as though she had robbed a jewelry store. "Aunt Cat-Eye?" Estella managed to choke out, still unable to believe her eyes. "What? How are you here?" "Oh, we came to visit you," Catalina beamed, flashing her gold crowns. "Emilio, come out and say hello to your cousin." From the same bathroom emerged a man of about 35, thin, balding, with a permanently apologetic expression. Emilio wore a wrinkled t-shirt and stained jeans, and he reeked of tobacco and something else unpleasant. "Hi, Estella," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. "Sorry for dropping in like this, but Mom said you wouldn't mind. We called the manager from your building's management company, told him we're family, and he gave us the spare keys." Estella stood there, holding the cake like a shield, trying to process what was happening. The last time she had seen these relatives was at her grandfather's wake, when they'd had an ugly argument over who would inherit the grandfather's farm. Catalina had accused Estella's parents of greed and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. "But I didn't invite," Estella began, but her aunt instantly cut her off with a dramatic gesture. "Oh, my dear child, you wouldn't leave your own blood out on the street, would you?" Catalina's voice took on tragic notes, and her eyes filled with tears. "We've had such troubles, such misfortunes. We'll only be here a few days, just until we sort out our housing situation." Estella felt the ground slipping out from under her. She and Diego's apartment was small, just 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom. Every square meter was carefully thought out and used, and there was absolutely no space for long-term guests. "Aunt Cat-Eye, but we have so little room." Estella tried to object, but the woman had already wrapped her in a suffocating hug, pressing her against her ample chest. "Oh, Estelita, you're such a good girl," Catalina said. "We'll settle in the living room. On the couch we don't need much. Emilio can sleep on the floor, he's used to it." She spoke as if everything had already been decided. "And what a lovely little apartment you have. You can tell a good homemaker lives here." Meanwhile, Emilio was hauling things from the hallway into the living room, and Estella watched in horror as their cozy space turned into a storage room. The couch, something she and Diego had saved for 6 months to buy, was already buried under bags and suitcases, and on the coffee table sat an open bottle of tequila and a plate with the remains of sandwiches. "We already had a little something to eat," Emilio said with an apologetic smile. "We were so hungry after the trip." Hope you don't mind that we took a few things from the fridge. Estella nodded mechanically, though alarm bells were ringing in her head. She and Diego stocked their fridge once a week, budgeting carefully, and every single item was accounted for. "And where's Dieguito?" asked Catalina, looking around. "We were so eager to meet him. Emilio's not married either. By the way, maybe Dieguito has some single girlfriends." Those words made Estella feel sick. The thought of Emilio meeting her husband's female friends was more than she could bear. "Diego isn't home from work yet," she replied. "He usually comes in around 7. "Well, perfect." Catalina clapped her hands. "We'll have time to get everything set up. Emilio, take the bed linens out of the suitcase." Estella watched the chaos unfold, feeling panic rising inside her. She was still holding the cake, which now seemed like a cruel joke compared to her plans for a cozy evening. The apartment smelled of unfamiliar perfume, tobacco, and something else she couldn't quite place, something that made the familiar space feel alien and hostile. "Aunt Katai," Estella began cautiously, "what happened? Why did you arrive so suddenly?" Catalina's face instantly changed, taking on a pained expression. She sank onto the couch, pushing bags aside, and pressed a hand to her heart. "Oh, darling, if you only knew what we've been through," she began, her voice trembling. "Emilio got fired, his boss was a monster, nitpicking about everything. And I'm being evicted, they claim I'm behind on utilities. But that's not true. I've always paid on time." At these words, Emilio seemed to shrink even further into himself and turned toward the window. "We thought you were doing well, you've got a job, a good husband," Catalina continued. "So we decided to turn to family. Where else could we go? We have no other relatives." Estella realized they were boxing her into a corner. Refusing relatives who asked for help wasn't in her nature. Her parents had raised her to believe that family was sacred and you always helped those in trouble. But at the same time, she was thinking about Diego and how he would react to such a surprise. "How long do you plan to?" Estella began, but Catalina cut her off again. "Oh, child, we're not freeloaders. 10 days, 2 weeks at most, and we'll find a place. Emilio's already going to interviews, and I have a friend who can help us with an apartment." The sound of keys in the lock made everyone fall silent. Diego walked into the apartment and stopped short when he saw the suitcases in the hallway. Estella watched different emotions pass across his face: surprise, confusion, and then something very much like irritation. "Estella, what's going on?" he asked, taking off his jacket. "Dieguito." Catalina leapt up from the couch and rushed toward him as if he were her long-lost son. "At last, we meet. I'm Catalina, Estella's aunt, and this is my son Emilio." Diego shook the offered hand mechanically, but his gaze was wary. "Pleasure," he said politely, though Estella knew him well enough to hear the steel in his voice. "And what brings you here?" "Oh, Dieguito, we've had such misfortune." Catalina immediately shifted into her tragic mode. "We've been left without a roof over our heads, without work. So we turned to our only family. Estelita, of course, took us in, such a kind soul." Estella saw Diego flinch at the overly familiar tone. "Estella, can I talk to you for a minute?" Diego took her by the hand and led her into the kitchen. As soon as the door closed behind them, he turned to her with an expression that made her shiver. "Please explain what's going on," he said quietly but very clearly. "Why do I come home to find strangers here with suitcases?" "Diego, this is my aunt," Estella began, her voice trembling. "Your aunt, the one you last saw 3 years ago, the one who caused the scene back then?" Diego folded his arms. "The same aunt you've told me less than flattering stories about?" Estella nodded, feeling guilty even though she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. "They're in a tough spot," she said. "Emilio was fired, and Catalina's being evicted. They say it's only for a couple of weeks." "Estella," Diego stepped closer and took her hands, "you do realize our apartment isn't elastic, right? We have 1 bedroom, and we barely fit ourselves. Now there are 2 more adults here for an undefined period. But I couldn't just throw them out." Estella felt tears rising in her throat. "They're family. They asked for help. And what about us? Are we not family?" Diego's voice had hardened. "Don't we have a right to a peaceful life in our own home?" From the living room came Catalina's loud voice saying something to Emilio, along with the sound of furniture being moved. Diego closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "All right," he said at last. "But we're setting clear rules and a time limit. 1 week, maximum, and they need to be actively looking for a place. No lying around on the couch, no freeloading." Estella nodded, feeling a wave of relief. She knew Diego was a good man and wouldn't leave people in trouble, even if he didn't like them. When they returned to the living room, the scene had changed dramatically. Catalina had already spread her numerous jars of creams and medicines across every surface. Emilio was smoking on the balcony, and the couch was now made up as a bed. "There's Dieguito," Catalina exclaimed. "We're settling in nicely. Emilio, come meet Dieguito." Emilio stubbed out his cigarette and came back inside. Up close, he looked even more worn-out, puffy face, red eyes, trembling hands. "Thanks for taking us in," he mumbled, extending his hand to Diego. "I know it's inconvenient." "Emilio's just shy," Catalina interjected, "but he's a good man. Hardworking, doesn't drink. Just unlucky with jobs." Diego shook Emilio's hand, trying not to show his distaste at the man's clammy grip. "We're happy to help in a difficult situation," Diego said formally, "but let's agree on the conditions right now. This is temporary, maximum 1 week. In that time, you need to find permanent housing." Catalina's face immediately fell. "A week? But we've only just arrived. We need time to get our bearings, find work." "A week is plenty to figure out your options," Diego said firmly. "Also, we both work and get up early. We asked for quiet from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Emilio nodded, but Catalina looked displeased. Of course, we're not savages," she said. "But, Dieguito, you know how hard it is to find a place right now. Maybe 2 weeks instead?" "1 week," Diego repeated. "Now let's have dinner. Estella, what do we have?" Estella went to the fridge and gasped. Half of the groceries they had bought for the week were gone. The ham, cheese, yogurt gone. Only 2 slices of bread remained. "Oh, we just had a little snack," Emilio said apologetically. "We got so hungry on the way here." Diego came to the fridge and silently took stock of the damage. His face turned to stone. "I see," he said finally. "Estella, let's go to the store. Maybe we could come with you?" Catalina brightened. "It's just, we have very little money left. Only for the bare essentials." "No, thank you," Diego cut her off. "We'll be quick." In the elevator, Diego was silent, and Estella could feel waves of irritation radiating from him. "Diego," she began. "In half an hour they've eaten 3 days' worth of food," he said. "Estella, do you realize this is just the beginning?" Estella nodded, but inside she felt herself tightening. She knew her husband was right, but she couldn't get out of her head the pleading look in Aunt Catalina's eyes and her words about having nowhere else to go. At the store, they silently gathered groceries for dinner and breakfast, but Estella saw Diego doing the math in his head. Their budget was planned down to the last detail, and unplanned expenses to feed guests would take a painful toll on their finances. When they returned home, Catalina and Emilio were sprawled on the couch, watching TV and flipping through channels. "We found such an interesting program," Catalina announced. "They're talking about family values, how important it is to keep close family ties." Diego shot her a meaningful look and went to the kitchen to cook dinner. Estella followed him, feeling torn between 2 sides. Dinner was tense. Catalina launched into endless stories about her misfortunes. Emilio stayed silent and ate greedily, while Diego answered in monosyllables and tried to finish the meal as quickly as possible. "Oh, what a beautiful cake!" Catalina exclaimed when she noticed the box on the table. "Let's have it with tea." Estella looked at the cake she had bought in hopes of a quiet evening with her husband and realized that the cozy world they had been building was crumbling before her eyes. But she couldn't bring herself to refuse the guests. "Of course," she said, and went to put the kettle on. Outside, twilight was settling in, and in the reflection of the glass, Estella saw strangers in her home, heard their voices, smelled their presence. For the first time in years, she felt like a guest in her own apartment. The morning began with Estella waking to the sound of running water and Aunt Catalina's loud voice, singing something indeterminate in the bathroom. The alarm clock read 6:30, half an hour earlier than their usual wake-up time. Next to her, Diego lay with his eyes closed, but the tension in his muscles showed he wasn't asleep either. "Good morning, my sunshine," Catalina trilled, sweeping out of the bathroom in a bright pink robe that made Estella's eyes hurt. "Oh, you're still asleep? Sorry, I thought working people got up early." Diego sat up on the bed and rubbed his face with his hands. Estella saw the muscle in his jaw twitch, a sure sign his patience was running out. "We get up at 7, he said evenly. "We have a routine." "Oh, forgive me, forgive me." Catalina waved her hands, looking anything but remorseful. "I've always been an early riser since I was young. And my Emilio is still asleep, he's such a sleepyhead. Oh, I hope you don't mind I used the hot water. I need my morning beauty treatments, you know." Estella felt something clench inside her. Hot water in their home wasn't unlimited. The old gas heater was slow to warm up. If Catalina had used it all for her beauty treatments, she and Diego would have to wash in cold water. Next time, please let us know, Estella asked, trying to keep her tone polite. We have to get ready for work too. Of course, darling, of course. Catalina was already heading to the kitchen. I'll make breakfast in the meantime. I see you have oatmeal, I love it. And I'll brew some coffee. Diego and Estella exchanged glances. The oatmeal was their breakfast for the whole week, and the good coffee, expensive, was bought in small packets and used sparingly. As expected, the bathroom now had only cold water. Diego washed in silence, but Estella saw his lips press into a thin line when the icy stream hit his face. She herself barely stifled a gasp when the cold water burned her skin. In the kitchen, a surprise awaited them. Catalina had indeed made breakfast, but in doing so had used up all the oatmeal, all the coffee, and most of the milk. On the stove simmered a massive pot of porridge, and the air was thick with the aroma of fresh coffee. "All ready," Catalina announced proudly. "Sit down, my dears." Emilio was already at the table, sleepy and disheveled, methodically shoveling porridge into his mouth. In front of him was a huge mug of steaming coffee. "Morning," he mumbled without looking up. Estella sat down and mentally calculated how many days they'd now go without a proper breakfast. The oatmeal meant to last a week had disappeared in a single morning. "Aunt Cat-Eye," she began carefully, "maybe next time you could cook a little less. We plan our groceries for a certain period." "Oh, darling, nonsense." Catalina waved her hand dismissively. "We're not freeloaders. Emilio will go job hunting today, earn some money, and make it up to you. Right, son?" Emilio nodded, though not very convincingly. "Yes, of course. I've already seen a few ads online. I'll be making calls today." Diego finished his coffee, which was noticeably less than his usual portion, and stood up. "We have to get to work," he said. "And we're not going anywhere," Catalina replied. "We'll stay home and tidy up. I'm a good housekeeper. I love to keep everything clean." At those words, Estella shuddered. She imagined her aunt rummaging through their belongings under the pretext of cleaning and felt a chill. In the elevator, Diego was silent until they reached the ground floor. Then he suddenly stopped at the exit. "Estella, I think we made a mistake," he said quietly. "In one day they've eaten more than we do in 3. And this is just the beginning." Estella nodded, but something inside her resisted. "What was I supposed to do? Throw them out on the street?" "You could have said we can't host guests for a long stay," Diego replied. "I understand they're your family, but we have the right to a normal life too." All day at work, Estella thought about home, and those thoughts were far from pleasant. She pictured Catalina and Emilio taking over the apartment, using their things, and it made her uneasy. During her lunch break, her phone rang from an unfamiliar number. "Estelita, it's Aunt Cat-Eye," the cheerful voice announced. "I'm calling from Emilio's phone. My battery died. Listen, darling, do you have any laundry detergent? We want to wash some clothes." "It's in the bathroom on the shelf," Estella replied, trying not to let her irritation show. "Oh, but it's just a little box. Is that for one load?" Estella clenched her teeth. The detergent was expensive, hypoallergenic, and meant to last a month. "It says on the box how much to use for one wash," she said. "Oh, yes, well, we're used to buying the big packs. It's more economical, you know." "Don't worry, we'll buy the same kind later." After that call, Estella couldn't focus on work. Her mind kept circling around the thought that by evening, their home would look completely different, and their familiar way of life was collapsing before her eyes. She went home as if walking to the gallows. Even on the stairs, she could hear Catalina's loud voice and the sound of the TV. The apartment smelled of food, not the kind Estella usually cooked, but something heavier, oilier. "Estelita, my dear." Catalina rushed out to meet her, wearing an apron and beaming. "There you are. We're making dinner. We wanted to surprise you." In the kitchen, a huge frying pan sizzled and spat grease on the stove. The entire table was covered with plates and bowls, and the sink was piled high with dirty dishes. "What's all this?" Estella asked, taking in the spectacle. "Fried potatoes with chorizo," Catalina announced proudly. "Emilio loves it, and my doctor told me to eat more fatty foods for my health. And we've got onions with it, pickled cucumbers, beautiful." Estella opened the fridge and saw that half of the remaining groceries were gone. The potatoes, onions, and pickles she and Diego had planned to make last all week had vanished. "Aunt Cat-Eye," Estella began, trying to keep her voice calm, "where did you get the ingredients?" "From your fridge, darling," Catalina replied breezily. "You don't mind if we cook for everyone, do you?" Emilio worked so hard today, making calls about jobs. Didn't work out yet, but we'll try again tomorrow. Emilio was in the living room, flipping through TV channels. On the table next to him sat an open bottle of beer. Where did the beer come from? Estella asked. Oh, we just ran to the store, Catalina said. Emilio was so upset about not getting the job, I wanted to cheer him up. We only bought one bottle. Estella spotted 2 more empties in the trash and realized the one bottle was hardly the whole story. Diego came home at 7:30 and immediately sensed the atmosphere. The smell of fried chorizo, the blaring TV, clothes strewn over the couch. It was all so different from their usual quiet, cozy home that he stopped in the doorway. Dieguito. Catalina rushed to hug him. You're home. We've been working hard, making dinner. Want some fried potatoes? Thanks, but I'm not really a fan of greasy food, Diego replied politely, though Estella saw his shoulders tense. Oh, nonsense. A man needs to eat well, Catalina persisted. You're looking so skinny, Estelita must not be feeding you. That was the last straw for Diego. Estella saw his eyes turn cold. Estella cooks perfectly well, he said in an icy tone. And she feeds me more than enough. Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. Catalina waved her hands. I was just trying to share some motherly care. Dinner was so tense it could have been cut with a knife. Diego ate in silence, answering Catalina's endless chatter with one-word replies. Emilio devoured his food as if he hadn't eaten in days. Estella sat between them, feeling like a tightrope walker over a canyon. You know, Emilio said suddenly, lifting his head from his plate, someone told me today there's a way to make quick money. I just need a small amount to get started. Diego slowly looked up at him. How much? He asked. Emilio named the figure casually. I'll pay you back double in a month. It's a sure thing, guaranteed. Estella nearly choked. It was half their combined monthly salary. What kind of sure thing? Diego's voice was like steel. Well, it's an investment. Emilio hesitated. A friend of mine is organizing it. Very reliable guy. Everyone who works with him makes good money. A pyramid scheme, Diego said flatly. Oh, come on, what pyramid scheme? Catalina protested. My Emilio's not stupid, he wouldn't get involved in anything shady. Mama's right, Emilio agreed. It's a real business. And I'm not asking for a gift, I'll pay it back, plus interest. Diego set down his fork and fixed Emilio with a stare that made him shrink back. First, we don't have spare money, Diego said slowly and clearly. Second, even if we did, we wouldn't give it to you. Third, all these guaranteed income investments are just pyramids. Why do you have to assume the worst? Catalina pouted. Maybe he really has a good opportunity. A good opportunity is finding a proper job and working honestly, Diego snapped. Not chasing easy money. Emilio flushed and looked away. Catalina also looked offended. Oh, why so harsh, Dieguito? She tried to soften the mood. Emilio didn't know you didn't have money. We thought you were well off. We support ourselves through our own work, Estella said, speaking up for the first time all evening. And we live within our means. Yes, of course, Catalina nodded quickly. We've always done the same. It's just, times are hard right now. After dinner, Diego went to the bedroom, saying he was tired, while Estella stayed to wash the dishes. Catalina and Emilio settled in the living room to watch TV, their laughter and loud voices drifting through the apartment. When Estella finally made it to the bedroom, Diego was sitting on the bed, staring out the window. Diego, she began, but he raised his hand. Estella, I can't live like this, he said quietly. In 2 days, they've eaten a week's worth of food, used up all the laundry detergent, and treated our apartment like it's theirs. And now they're asking for money. But this is just the beginning. Estella tried. Exactly, Diego turned to her. It's just the beginning. What's next? They're not even trying to find work or a place to live. Your aunt stayed home all day, and Emilio supposedly made calls, but somehow ended up drinking beer and watching TV. Estella knew he was right but couldn't bring herself to fully agree. They need time to adjust. Estella, Diego took her hands, this is an ultimatum. Either they leave by the end of the week, or I'll leave and we'll be done. The words hit like a whip. Estella felt the blood drain from her face. Are you serious? Absolutely. I'm not going to support your relatives and turn our life into hell. I have the right to peace in my own home. That night, Estella lay in bed, unable to sleep. From the living room came muffled voices, Catalina and Emilio whispering about something. Beside her, Diego lay tense, the air between them heavy. What am I supposed to do? She thought. On one hand, her husband was right. in just 2 days, their peaceful life had turned into a nightmare. On the other, how could she throw out family who had come asking for help? She thought about her childhood, about how her parents had taught her never to refuse family, to always help those in need. Family is sacred, her mother used to say. But back then, Estella didn't know that family could be such a burden. Something fell in the next room, followed by Emilio's muffled laugh. Diego turned to face away from her, deliberately showing his back. Estella closed her eyes and tried to imagine their home being theirs again in a week. But somehow, it was hard to believe. Tuesday morning began with Diego silently getting ready for work, avoiding looking at his wife. Estella lay in bed, watching as he packed a spare shirt and socks into his bag, things he usually left at home. Her heart tightened with a sense of dread. "Diego, what are you doing?" she asked, sitting up in bed. "Getting ready not to come home tonight," he replied without turning around. "I'll stay at Sergio's." The words hit like a slap. Estella felt her throat close as tears threatened to rise. "But why? The week isn't even over yet." Diego stopped at the door and finally looked at her. The exhaustion and disappointment in his eyes made Estella shiver. "Because I can't keep listening to your aunt singing in the bathroom at 6:30 in the morning while Emilio snores on the couch. Because the fridge is empty again, and there are beer bottles on the table. And because you're choosing them over me." "I'm not choosing them," Estella cried. "I just can't throw people out onto the street." "But you can throw me out," Diego said, and left the room. She heard him walk down the hallway, heard the click of the front door lock. Only then did the tears she had been holding back pour out. From the kitchen came the clatter of dishes and Catalina's voice singing something cheerful. Estella wiped her eyes and forced herself to get up. She had to go to work and pretend everything was fine, even though inside everything was falling apart. In the kitchen, Catalina was bustling at the stove, cooking scrambled eggs in 3 different frying pans at once. The table was covered with plates, and the air was thick with the smell of fried chorizo. "Estelita, good morning," she exclaimed brightly. "Where's Dieguito? I made such a breakfast." "Diego's already gone," Estella replied, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "Oh, what a pity." Catalina clapped her hands together. "I tried so hard." "Oh well, Emilio will eat it all, he's got such an appetite." Emilio was indeed already at the table, devouring scrambled eggs with visible pleasure. In front of him stood a large mug of coffee. Judging by the aroma, it was the expensive kind Estella bought only for special occasions. "Aunt Katai," Estella began cautiously, "how's the search for housing going?" "It's already the 3rd day." Catalina's face immediately took on a pained expression. "Oh, darling, if only you knew how hard it is. Prices are insane everywhere, and the requirements. They want references, guarantors. And some of our documents aren't entirely in order." "What documents?" Estella asked warily. "Oh, just little things," Catalina waved a hand dismissively. "Emilio's got a bad reference from his last job, and I've had some issues with the management company." Estella felt a cold knot forming inside her. It was becoming clear that her relatives weren't just in a rough patch, they had serious problems they weren't telling her about. "And Emilio is looking for work?" she asked. "Of course he is." Emilio cut in quickly. "I went to 2 interviews yesterday." But something in his tone made Estella suspicious. "And how did they go?" "Well," Emilio hesitated. "Not great. They say I don't have enough experience. But maybe they'll call back." Catalina immediately jumped in. "Emilio's just modest, he doesn't know how to sell himself. But he's so hardworking, so responsible. Employers these days are just too picky." At work, Estella couldn't concentrate. Her thoughts kept going back to her morning conversation with Diego, to his words about her choosing her relatives over him. Could it be true? Was she really, in trying to help Catalina and Emilio, losing the most important person in her life? During her lunch break, Diego called. "Estella," he said wearily, "I'm not coming home tonight. I need time to think." "Diego, please, let's talk," she pleaded. "We can work this out." "We can," he agreed. "If you tell your relatives they have to leave tomorrow." "I can't." Estella's voice broke. "Don't you see they're really in trouble?" "And I'm not in trouble?" Diego's voice sharpened. "I can't live peacefully in my own home. I can't sleep properly. I can't eat what I like because your dear relatives devour everything. And somehow I'm the bad guy for not wanting to support them." "Diego." "Estella, I'm tired. Very tired. Think about what matters more to you, our family, or some abstract duty to people who are clearly taking advantage of your kindness." He hung up, and Estella sat staring at her silent phone for a long time. Her coworkers glanced at her with sympathy, but no one dared approach her. Problems were written all over her face. She went home that evening as if walking to an execution. In the building's hallway, she was stopped by Senora Maria, an elderly neighbor they usually only greeted in passing. "Estelita," she said, "can I have a word?" "Of course," Estella replied, though talking was the last thing she wanted. "I don't want to meddle," Senora Maria began, "but your guests are very noisy. Yesterday there was music until midnight, and this morning there was such a racket." Estella felt her cheeks burn with shame. "I'm so sorry. It's just temporary. They'll be leaving soon." "I'm not complaining, dear," the older woman said kindly. "I just see that you don't seem too happy about them yourself. Maybe it's worth having a word with them." Her words hit home. Estella realized that even the neighbors could see how her own relatives were making her life miserable. Another surprise awaited her in the apartment. Catalina was in the kitchen with the upstairs neighbor, loudly recounting her misfortunes. On the table were cups of tea and a plate of cookies, the expensive cookies Estella bought only once a month as a small treat. "And here's Estelita," Catalina exclaimed. "Come meet Senora Vera, she lives upstairs. Such a lovely woman." "Catalina invited me for tea," Senora Vera said with an awkward smile. "She told me about your troubles." "I'm very sorry." Estella nodded, forcing a pleasant expression, though inside she was boiling. Catalina hadn't just taken over their home, she was now discussing their private business with strangers. "Where's Emilio?" Estella asked. "Emilio's gone to an interview," Catalina announced proudly. "Such a promising job. He might even start tomorrow." When the neighbor finally left, Estella decided it was time for a serious conversation. "Aunt Catai, we need to talk." "Of course, darling." Catalina plopped down on the couch and patted the seat beside her. "Sit down, let's talk about everything." "You promised to find a place within a week," Estella began. "It's already been 3 days, and there's no progress at all." Catalina's face instantly turned mournful. "Oh, Estelita, you see how hard we're trying. But everything's so expensive, so complicated. And we're simple people, not used to these city rules. Aunt Catai, I have to tell you, Diego gave me an ultimatum. Either you move out by the end of the week, or he's filing for divorce." Catalina threw up her hands and clutched them to her chest. "Oh, darling, how can he? I'm your family, your own blood. And what is he? Just some stranger?" "He's my husband," Estella said, and for the first time in days her voice had steel in it. "Husbands come and go," Catalina said in a lecturing tone, "but family is forever. My sister, your mother, God rest her soul, she'd be horrified to know you're throwing your own aunt out onto the street." The mention of her mother was the hardest blow. Estella felt a lump rising in her throat. "I'm not throwing anyone out." "You are." Catalina's voice rose. "Because that man told you to. Do you know what happens to women who betray their family for a man? They end up with nothing. Men are fickle. Today they love you, tomorrow they leave. But family will always support you." The words pelted down like hail, each one hitting its mark. Estella felt her resolve crumbling under the barrage. "I've seen plenty of cases like that," Catalina continued, working herself up. "A woman turns her back on her family, then the man dumps her, and she's left all alone, too ashamed to even come back to her relatives." "Shut up!" Estella suddenly shouted so loudly she startled herself. Catalina froze for a moment, then quickly recovered. "Oh, I see," she said in an offended tone. "Now you're yelling at your elders. That's what your precious Dieguito has done to you." At that moment, Emilio returned. He was clearly in bad shape, swaying slightly, reeking of alcohol, his eyes bloodshot. "What's going on here?" he mumbled. "Why is everyone yelling?" "Emilio!" Catalina rushed to her son. "Where have you been? You said you were going to an interview." "I was at an interview," Emilio replied uncertainly. "They didn't take me. Said I wasn't a fit. Then I met an old friend, and we had a few drinks." Estella looked at him and felt her last illusions shatter. There had been no interview, he had just gone to the nearest cantina and gotten drunk. "Aunt Catai," she said quietly but firmly, "tomorrow we're going to look for a place for you. Together. And by the end of the week, you'll be moved out." "But, Estelita." "No discussion. Either that, or I call Diego and tell him you're staying, and I pack my things to go live with him." Catalina saw that this time Estella was serious, and nodded, though a flash of anger crossed her eyes. That evening, Estella called Diego. "Diego, can we meet?" she asked. "What happened? Have your relatives moved out?" "No, but I spoke to them. They'll be gone by the end of the week. I promise." Diego was silent for a moment. "Estella, I don't believe in these promises anymore. It's been the same words for 3 days. Diego, please. I feel awful without you. Another pause. All right, let's meet at the cafe on the corner at 8. The meeting was tense. Diego looked tired and distant, as though he'd already made up his mind. Estella, he said, stirring his coffee, I thought a lot today. And I realized something. We see family differently. What do you mean? For you, family means all your relatives, even the ones who exploit your kindness. For me, family means you and me. And I'm not willing to sacrifice our family for your idea of duty. Estella felt her eyes fill with tears. But I told you they'll leave. When? Diego asked sharply. Give me an exact date. By Sunday, Estella forced out. All right, if they're gone by Sunday evening, I'll come back. If not, I'll file for divorce Monday morning. He stood and headed for the door, but turned back before leaving. Estella, I love you, but I can't live like this anymore. Estella sat in the empty cafe, crying, ignoring the sympathetic looks from the waitress. For the first time in 7 years of marriage, she realized she might lose the most important person in her life. And all because of people who called themselves family but behaved like parasites. At home, another surprise awaited her. Emilio was sprawled on the couch, snoring loudly, while Catalina sat in the kitchen on the phone. Oh, really? Catalina exclaimed into the receiver. Completely heartless. And we thought she'd help her own blood. Estella realized her aunt was recounting their earlier conversation to someone and felt a wave of disgust. Aunt Cat, she said, who are you talking to? Catalina quickly said goodbye and hung up. Oh, just an old friend. She's invited us over. For long? Estella asked hopefully. Oh no, just an hour or two, for tea. Estella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 4 days left until Sunday. 4 days to save her marriage and get her life back if it wasn't already too late. The morning began with the sound of breaking dishes and Emilio's loud cursing. Estella jumped out of bed and ran to the kitchen, where she found shards of her favorite cup, the one Diego had given her on the anniversary of their first meeting, scattered across the floor. What happened? She asked, staring at the tiny porcelain fragments. Sorry, Emilio said sheepishly, spreading his hands. My hands are shaky this morning, my head hurts. I knocked it over by accident. The smell of alcohol on his breath made Estella instinctively step back. His eyes were bloodshot and inflamed, his face puffy. Yesterday's job hunting had clearly ended in the nearest bar again. Emilio. Catalina appeared in the kitchen in her bright pink robe. How could you? You broke such a beautiful cup. Oh, come on, Mom, he muttered. We'll buy another one. It's just a cup. Estella silently gathered the pieces, each shard stabbing at her heart. It wasn't just a cup, it was a piece of her and Diego's history, their shared memories. And now it was in the trash, like a symbol of what was happening to their life. Don't be upset, Estelita. Catalina tried to hug her. It's for good luck. Broken dishes mean happiness. What happiness? Estella asked wearily. My husband hasn't slept at home for 3 days, my relatives have turned our apartment into a dive, and you're talking about happiness? Oh, don't say that. Catalina threw up her hands. Everything will work out. The main thing is not to lose hope. Easy for you to say, Estella thought, tossing the last shards into the bin. She had called Diego several times yesterday, but he hadn't answered. Only late at night did he send a short message, until Sunday. Remember the ultimatum. At work, Estella tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back home. Over the past few days, she had realized her relatives weren't even trying to find a place or work. They'd settled into the apartment as if it were their own and had no intention of leaving. During her lunch break, her coworker Marina, a middle-aged woman with whom she only occasionally exchanged a few words, approached her. Estella, sorry to butt in, Marina said cautiously, but you look, well, maybe you need to talk? Estella looked at her and suddenly felt an overwhelming need to spill everything. The words poured out, about the relatives' sudden arrival, their behavior, Diego's ultimatum. I see, Marina nodded when Estella finished. Do you know where they came from? Maybe you should check up on them? What do you mean? Well, they didn't just drop from the sky. They worked somewhere, lived somewhere. Maybe people there know what they're really like? Marina's words made Estella pause. It was true, she only knew about Aunt Catalina and Emilio's life from what they themselves had told her. What if they'd been lying? That evening, when Catalina had gone to visit a friend and Emilio had left for a job interview that would almost certainly end in a bar, Estella decided on a desperate move. She searched through her aunt's things and copied down the address of her last place of work. On Saturday morning, claiming she had urgent errands, Estella went to that address. It turned out to be a small garment factory on the outskirts of the city. The security guard was reluctant to let her in, but when Estella explained that she was Catalina Perez's niece and wanted a reference for a new job, he softened. Perez? He repeated. Oh, the redhead. I remember. She was fired a long time ago. Go see Senora Lucia, she worked in HR back then. Lucia Gonzalez was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a stern face. Catalina Perez? She repeated the name. Oh, girl, you shouldn't be getting involved with her. What do you mean? Estella asked, suddenly wary. She was fired for theft, Lucia said bluntly. She was taking fabric, notions. Thought no one would notice. And when she was caught, she made a huge scene yelling that she was being framed, claiming she was an honest worker. Estella felt the floor drop out from under her. Are you sure? Absolutely. The woman nodded. I caught her red-handed myself. And her son's no better. He came to us about a year ago asking for a job. We took him out of pity, and within a week he stopped showing up. Later we found out he was on a drinking binge. But she told me she was unfairly fired. Ha! Lucia gave a dry laugh. That's what they all say. Listen, girl, if they've shown up at your place, keep your guard up. Those two only know how to sponge off relatives. On the way home, Estella turned over everything she'd just learned. So Aunt Catalina had been lying to her from the very start. She hadn't been unjustly dismissed, she'd been caught stealing. And Emilio? Judging by what she'd heard, his drinking problem was far worse than she'd realized. At home, another surprise awaited her. On the kitchen table lay a note from Catalina. Estelita, Emilio, and I went out of town to a friend's place, back tomorrow evening. Don't be lonely. Kisses. Estella crushed the note in her fist. So while she'd been torturing herself with guilt and tearing herself apart between her husband and her relatives, they were happily enjoying themselves at some country house. She walked through the apartment, assessing the damage. The living room was a disaster, clothes piled on the couch, empty bottles and cigarette butts on the floor, coffee rings covering the coffee table. In the kitchen was a mountain of dirty dishes, and the fridge was almost empty. Suddenly her phone rang. An unknown number. Estella? A male voice asked. This is Officer Moreno. We've got a bit of a situation with your relatives. Her heart sank. What kind of situation? They caused a disturbance in a restaurant and are refusing to pay the bill. They say you'll cover it. Can you come down here? Estella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. So much for a friend's place. They'd simply gone to a restaurant, stuffed themselves, and now expected her to bail them out. I'm on my way, she said. The restaurant turned out to be a cheap joint on the outskirts. Catalina and Emilio were sitting at a table with the officer and the restaurant manager. Catalina looked disheveled, her makeup smeared, while Emilio was openly swaying in his seat. Estelita, Catalina exclaimed when she saw her niece. Thank God you came. It's all a big misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? Estella asked coldly. Well, we thought it was on the house, Emilio stammered. Turns out we had to pay. This is the bill, the manager said, handing her a slip. They ordered the most expensive dishes, tequila. Estella looked at the total and felt a chill. It was half her monthly salary. I'm not paying this, she said firmly. What do you mean you're not? Catalina gasped. But we're family. Family doesn't cause scenes in restaurants and expect their relatives to cover their indulgences, Estella replied. The officer cleared his throat. If the bill isn't paid, we'll have to file a report. That's an administrative offense. Estella stood there, thinking. She could pay, but then she'd be completely broke. Or she could refuse, and her relatives would face a fine or even court. How much cash do you have? She asked Catalina. Almost nothing, Catalina muttered. And you? Estella turned to Emilio. I've got a little, he mumbled. Put it all on the table. Now. Reluctantly, they pulled out their money. This will cover part of it, the manager said. And the rest? Estella took a deep breath. I'll cover the rest. But this is the last time. Once the matter was settled, Estella drove them home in total silence. Only at the entrance did Catalina try to explain herself. Estelita, we didn't mean for this to happen. We just wanted to have dinner. For that amount? Estella gave her a withering look. Aunt Cati, stop lying. I heard everything from the factory where you worked. Catalina's face changed, becoming guarded. What did they tell you? That you were fired for theft. That Emilio is an alcoholic who can't hold a job. That you've been lying to me from day one. Catalina opened her mouth to protest, but Estella cut her off. Enough. Tomorrow you're moving out. For good. But where will we go? Emilio whined. That's your problem. Your adults figure it out. At home, Estella locked herself in the bedroom and called Diego. He didn't answer right away. Diego, they're leaving tomorrow, she said without preamble. Really? His voice carried cautious hope. Really? I found out something about them. Turns out they've been lying to me from the very beginning. What exactly did you find out? Estella told him everything, her trip to the factory, her conversation with Lucia, the restaurant scandal. My God, Estella. Diego sounded stunned. And all this time you were feeling guilty toward them? I thought they were truly in trouble, that they needed help. They were just looking for fools to support them. Estella stayed silent, turning over everything that had happened. Yes, she had been a fool believing their tears and complaints without bothering to check if they were true. Diego, I'm sorry, she said at last. I was blind. I almost lost you because of people who were simply using us. Estella, the important thing is that you understand that now. Will they really be leaving tomorrow? Tomorrow morning. I won't even let them have breakfast in our house. Then I'll come home tomorrow evening. After speaking with her husband, Estella went into the living room, where Catalina and Emilio were quietly talking. Here's what's going to happen, she said. Tomorrow morning you pack your things and leave. I'm not giving you money for the trip. You'll have to solve your problems yourselves. Estelita, what are you saying? Catalina immediately tried to slip into her familiar victim act. How can you do this to your own blood? Family doesn't steal, lie, or cause drunken scenes, Estella shot back. And most of all, family doesn't try to destroy someone else's marriage. We didn't mean to, Emilio whined. You meant to. You counted on me feeling guilty and supporting you indefinitely. But the game's over. Catalina realized her usual tricks wouldn't work this time, and her face twisted with anger. Oh, so you're throwing us out, she exclaimed. Fine. I can see your man means more to you than your family. Just remember when he leaves you, and he will leave you, don't come to us for help. I won't, Estella said calmly. Now go to bed. In the morning, I want to see your things by the door. She went to her bedroom, leaving them in the living room. Muffled voices came through the wall. They were discussing something, but Estella didn't care. Tomorrow her home would be her own again, not a free-for-all for anyone looking to live off her. Lying in bed, she thought about how easy it is to mistake what you want to believe for reality. She had been so eager to help her relatives that she hadn't noticed them feeding off her kindness. But now things would change. Tomorrow would start a new life without lies, without manipulation, without people hiding behind family to achieve their own ends. Outside, the first light of the last day of this nightmare was breaking. Sunday morning began with Estella waking at 6:30 to a strange sound. Listening closely, she realized it was silence. For the first time in over a week there was no clatter of dishes, no running water, no loud voices. Even Emilio's snoring from the living room was absent. Getting out of bed, she carefully cracked the bedroom door. The hallway was deathly still. Could it be that her relatives had decided to leave quietly without saying goodbye? Her heart leapt with hope. But when she peeked into the living room, she was disappointed. Catalina and Emilio were still asleep, sprawled on the couch as if they owned it. The suitcases were exactly where they'd been on the first day. No one had even started packing. A wave of cold, decisive, cleansing anger rose in her. Enough. The game was over. Up, she said loudly, flicking on the light. Catalina stirred on the couch, frowning in annoyance. Estelita, what's the matter? It's so early. She mumbled sleepily. It's 7 o'clock. Time to pack. Emilio cracked one eye open, then squeezed it shut against the light. Mom, tell her my head's killing me. Something else will be killing you if you're still here in an hour, Estella said coldly. Catalina sat up, disheveled and irritable. Without her usual thick layer of makeup, she looked older and far less imposing. Estelita, really? Waking people up early on a Sunday. Let us wake up properly at least. You were given time, and it's up. But we still haven't found a place to live. Emilio groaned, clutching his head. That's your problem. You have 1 hour to pack. Estella turned and went to the kitchen to make breakfast only for herself. Let them understand that the era of free meals was over for good. As she brewed her coffee, muffled voices drifted from the living room. Catalina and Emilio were arguing quietly, apparently aware that the situation was serious. Half an hour later, Catalina came into the kitchen, tidied up but without her usual battle paint. Her expression was guilty and pleading. Estelita, give us just one more day, please. She began in her well-practiced tone. We've already found an option, but we can't see the apartment until tomorrow. No, Estella said curtly, without looking up from her cup. But where will we go? It's cold outside, looks like rain. I don't know. Not my problem. Realizing that tears and complaints were useless, Catalina's tone shifted. You've become so heartless, she said bitterly. Your heart's turned to stone. And your mother was such a kind woman. My mother was kind, but she wasn't stupid, Estella replied sharply. She would never have let parasites climb onto her back. Parasites? Catalina threw up her hands. How dare you? I dare because I know the truth. I know why you were fired from the factory. I know Emilio doesn't work, he drinks. I know you've been lying to me since the first day. Catalina's face twisted with rage, the mask of the good-natured aunt gone for good. Oh, so you were spying on us, she hissed. Digging into our past. Checking the stories you told me. And I found out that not a single word was true. So what? Catalina snapped. Maybe we embellished a little, but we're still family. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't turn a relative's home into a dive. Emilio appeared in the kitchen doorway, pale and rumpled. Mom, what's going on? He asked. What's going on? Catalina shrieked. Is that we're being thrown out onto the street by my own niece so heartless. I'm not throwing you out. I'm asking you to leave someone else's apartment, Estella corrected. You've had enough time to find a place to live. Where are we supposed to find it? Emilio slumped into a chair and buried his head in his hands. We have no money, no jobs. Then go to social services. They help people in difficult situations. Social services? Catalina was horrified. The lines there are endless, the bureaucracy's insane. And besides, it's humiliating. And living at someone else's expense isn't humiliating? Estella shot back. We're not living at someone else's expense. We're family. Catalina tried to return to her old tactic. Family means mutual support and respect, not one side working while the other leeches off them. Estella stood up from the table and glanced at the clock. You have 30 minutes left. I suggest you hurry with packing. And what if we don't leave? Emilio asked defiantly. I'll call the police. I'll report unlawful entry. The relatives realized the game was over. Catalina let out a theatrical sigh and headed for the living room, muttering about ingratitude and the cruelty of modern youth. The next half hour was a flurry of activity. Catalina and Emilio packed their numerous belongings, talking loudly and occasionally casting reproachful looks at Estella. They clearly still hoped she would soften at the last minute and let them stay. But Estella was resolute. She stood by the kitchen window, watching the gray morning sky and thinking that in an hour her home would be hers again. Well, we're packed, Catalina announced, appearing in the kitchen with 2 suitcases. Excellent. Goodbye. That's it? Catalina couldn't believe it. You're not even going to ask where we'll be living? No. That's your problem. And you won't give us money for the trip? No. Catalina stared at her niece as if seeing her for the first time. Well, fine, she said at last. It's obvious who you take after. Your father was a cold-hearted man, too. Your mother was kind, but you spitting image of your father. Thanks for the compliment, Estella replied evenly. Emilio dragged in his suitcase and several bags. He looked pitiful, disheveled, unshaven, with bloodshot eyes. Estella, he pleaded, at least give us something to get started. No. But how will we get there? He whined. Same way you got here. We hitchhiked, Catalina exclaimed. Then hitchhiked back. They understood there was no hope left and headed for the door. At the threshold, Catalina turned back. Mark my words, Estella. Men are all the same. Today they love you, tomorrow they leave you. And when your little Dieguito finds himself some young fool and throws you out, don't come crying to us. I won't, Estella promised. And we won't take you in. Emilio added bitterly. You'll know what it's like to be left on your own. The door slammed, and blessed silence filled the apartment. Estella stood in the hallway, listening as their footsteps faded on the stairs, then the front door downstairs closed. It was over. The nightmare was over. She slowly walked through the apartment, taking stock of the damage. The living room was a mess, the couch stained, crumbs and trash on the floor. The air reeked of tobacco and stale laundry. The kitchen also needed a deep clean, the stove spattered with grease, the sink full of dirty dishes. But all of that could be fixed. The important thing was, the home belonged to her and Diego again. Estella closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in 2 weeks, she felt genuine relief. The weight that had been crushing her shoulders all these days was gone. She began cleaning with the energy of someone reclaiming what was lost. She took out all the trash, aired the rooms, washed all the curtains and bedspreads. She gave special attention to the couch, vacuuming it and cleaning the upholstery with a special product she'd been meaning to try. By lunchtime, the apartment once again looked like a home, not a temporary shelter for questionable characters. At 1 o'clock, while Estella was washing the windows, her neighbor Senora Maria came by, bringing homemade cookies and a small bouquet of chrysanthemums from her balcony. "Estelita," she said gently, "I saw your guests leaving. I hope everything's all right now." "It is, Senora Maria. Thank you for putting up with all the noise." "Oh, don't mention it, dear. I understand how hard it can be with relatives. I went through something similar. My husband's sister came to stay for a week and stayed for 6 months. We barely got her out." "And how did you finally decide to?" "When I realized my home was turning into a train station and my husband was turning away from me, that's when I decided. Family, the real family, comes before all the relatives in the world." Those simple words gave Estella final confirmation that she'd done the right thing. At 2 o'clock, Diego called. "Estella, how are things? Have they left?" "They left. This morning. I'm already cleaning." "Really?" The relief in his voice made Estella smile. "Really? The house is ours again. I'm coming over. And I'll make you dinner. Your favorite." "Estella, I've missed our home so much. Our home." "So have I. Even though I was here every day." When Diego arrived, Estella met him at the door. They hugged for a long time without saying a word. The apartment smelled of cleanliness and good food, candles were lit on the table, and everything was just as it had been before the invasion of unwanted guests. "I've missed this so much," Diego said, looking around the living room. "The quiet, the order, just being home." "Diego, forgive me," Estella said. "I was blind. I almost lost you because of people who were just taking advantage of our kindness. Not just kindness, your sense of duty to your family." "Now I understand the difference between family and relatives," Estella admitted. "Family is the people who stand by you in hard times, without trying to climb onto your back. And relatives? Relatives can sometimes be strangers." Diego held her tighter. "The important thing is that you understand that now, and that we're together again." Over dinner, they talked about the future, about how they would never again let anyone into their home without first discussing it, about how kindness should be reasonable, and help should be targeted and limited in time. "You know," Estella said, cutting the cake she had bought on her way home, "I used to think that being a good person meant never refusing to help anyone. But now I realize that real kindness also includes the ability to say no. Especially to those who take advantage of it," Diego agreed. "Aunt Catalina said as she was leaving that you'd leave me as soon as you found some young fool." Diego laughed. "A young fool? Why would I want a fool when I have a smart wife who's finally learned to protect our family?" That evening, they sat together on the couch, the same one that had been buried under other people's things for 2 weeks, and watched a movie. Estella nestled against her husband, thinking about how easily a person can mistake the right thing for the wrong one, or good for bad. "Diego, what if they come back?" she asked. "They won't. They know they won't get anything here anymore. They'll find another relative they can use. And we'll change the locks tomorrow, just in case. And if they do show up, then we simply won't open the door. We have the right to live peacefully in our own home." Estella nodded. Yes, they had that right, and she would never let anyone violate it again. In the kitchen, the clock ticked, the one Diego had given her as a housewarming gift. In the fridge lay food bought only for the two of them. In the closets hung only their clothes. The home was a home again. "You know what I'm thinking?" Estella asked, lifting her head from his shoulder. "What?" "That this was a good lesson. Painful, but necessary. Now I know for sure what a real family is." "And what is that?" "It's you and me. The ones who build a shared home, shared plans, and a shared future. Not the ones who show up only when they need help." Diego kissed the top of her head. "Exactly. Now let's plan our shared future without uninvited guests." Before bed, Estella walked through the apartment one more time, making sure everything was in order. In the living room, the couch once again looked like a place for rest, not a bed for strangers. In the kitchen, flowers from Senora Maria stood on the windowsill, a sign that the neighbors approved of her decision. Outside, a fine autumn rain had begun to fall, cozy despite the chill. Inside, the apartment was warm and calm. 2 cups of tea sat cooling on the table, and everything was as it should be in a real home. Estella closed her eyes and thought that happiness isn't the absence of problems. Happiness is the ability to solve problems together with the ones you love, in the place you call home. And now their home belonged only to them. Forever. Tell us what you felt listening to this story. Every like inspires us to create new ones. Don't miss the next episode. Subscribe. May your family always be a source of strength and joy.
If you're enjoying it as well, Leave a like and subscribe to the channel.